Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 833B, and today's date is December 3rd, 2015, and the title of this episode is The San Bernardino Shooting is Following the False Flag Mass Shooting Script. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, as we know, because of prior reports, because we've been talking about this, Ukraine has cut off the power to Crimea. Of course, the entire thing was sabotaged. Kiev is moving very, very slowly to repair the electrical problems. And we can see at this point that Kiev is preparing, along with the United States, to make a major offensive in the southeastern and hopefully in Crimea, because they would love to have Crimea back. And this is why they're keeping the power off, trying to make the people suffer and make it easier for them to go into this area. This is the tactics that the United States uses in other countries when they're trying to remove the elected governments. We see it in Syria, where they knock out the power, they bring more troops in. A lot of the people have no power. Hopefully they turn against whatever government is in there at the time. And they use all these tactics. But Russia right now is now going to supply electricity to Crimea. And they have the first power bridge that is going across the Kerch Strait. It was completed. And they will be using this to supply Crimea with 80 to 90% of its power needs. Now, of course, they need more than this to keep everything operational. And what we're seeing right now is they're separating themselves from Ukraine at this point. Now, this was in the works for quite a while. And Ukraine knew this, the United States knew this, and they knew the Minsk II ceasefire agreement was coming due the end of this year. There has been no talks about extending it because it expires. And we understand the U.S. is in there training the National Guard, the Armed Forces, Special Op teams, bringing in lethal and defensive weapons. And we see shelling is occurring. We have equipment back on the contact lines. Everything is getting ready and prepared for the next offensive. How well will it go? We don't know at this point. But they've tried many, many times before, and it has not gone well for Ukraine. Now, the U.S. Navy guided missile cruiser, the USS Ross, is going to enter the Black Sea today. It's going to enhance the cooperation with the allies and partners. And we have to remember, under the Montreux Convention, the ship can only stay there for about 21 days or so, because the United States is not a state-sponsored actor in this region. So under the convention, it only can stay there for 21 days. So it's December 3rd right now. So around December 24th or 25th, the ship will have to leave. And what they usually do is they bring that ship out and they bring another ship back in. Now, we understand that they're going to be pushing for a major offensive, so we're going to have to watch that situation very carefully. They might even do it during the holiday season. This way, everyone is busy doing other things. We'll have to watch this very, very carefully. Now, it looks like the UK has passed the vote to begin Syria airstrikes. So we have Germany, France, UK, the Arab nations like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey, United States, all going into Syria. A lot of these countries bringing in ground troops. The war is on, people. They're making their push. We see that Britain has already started the airstrikes in Syria. We see that eventually they'll bring in ground troops, just like the United States is going to be ramping up the ground troops inside Syria. And Syria is out there saying that this is completely against international law. We didn't invite any of these countries into our country to help out. We only invited Russia. So basically, these countries are invading Syria. The U.S., Britain, France, the other nations, they got together and said, we're going to invade this country because we want Assad out. Period. That's what they're doing. We saw this in Yemen. We saw this in Libya. We saw this in Lebanon. We saw it in Iraq. We saw it in Ukraine. They tried in many, many other countries, and a lot of them have not worked out. Now, as we thought this was going to happen, Turkey and Russia, they decided to halt negotiations over the Turkish Stream pipeline. Now, this was part of the agenda of the United States and the private Western central bank world because they did not want a pipeline going through Turkey. And this was one of the reasons, most likely, they had them shoot down the Russian jet. Now, remember, it's not always one agenda. There's multiple agendas in this. We understand that Turkey has been stealing the oil in Syria and Iraq with the help of the United States. They guard the convoys. They have them go through Turkey. Then they sell them off to other nations, and they supply the Islamic State with the funds from the stolen oil. This is how they keep their proxy armies continually operational. And of course, as we know, the U.S. never hits the convoys. Yes, they put on a show where they hit a couple of them, but they ran out of ammunition. They dropped leaflets to let the drivers escape, and this was a complete setup to show the world that, yes, see, we hit the convoys. But the other 1,000 trucks, they're still operational. But Russia is trying to hit all of them, and they're continually bombing in that area. Now, as we know, we are approaching a world war. We know there's legislation in Congress to bring back the draft. And remember, whenever legislation is sitting in Congress, like the Dianne Feinstein bill, like the UN Arms Treaty, like the draft bill, like CISA, they always need some type of an event to push it through because there's no traction otherwise. No one's looking at it. So to help out with this upcoming war, Ashton Carter decided, not just him, but he announced that women will be able to go into all combat positions. Everyone who is able and willing to serve their country, he says, who can meet the standards, should have the full and equal opportunity to do so, and everyone can be in combat roles to fight this next war. This is what they're building up to. So they've been moving military assets all over the world, in the Pacific, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa. They have bills pending in Congress. All combat positions are open to women. Does anyone see a pattern here? Because I certainly do. And we're heading down this path to world war. And they're going to have to convince everyone that this is in your best interest. That you need to send your daughters, your sons, your brothers, your sisters, your parents off to war. And the only way to do this is with some type of an event. To make matters worse, the U.S. aircraft carrier Harry Truman is now in the Mediterranean. So we have many ships in the Mediterranean. We have Russian ships. We have the Russian missile cruiser operating off the Syrian coast. We have the U.S. aircraft carrier Harry Truman. We have other ships in the area. And we can see at this point is all we need is a Gulf of Tonkin incident to start the war. We just need an incident inside Syria. And of course, as you know, it will be the private Western central bank countries against Russia, then China, of course Syria and Iran, and others that they're going to throw in there. So we can see it right now. Everything is building up to this point. They're getting ready, they're getting prepared, and they're pushing as hard as they can. Now, John Kerry is out there, and he's saying, listen, if we can have some type of ceasefire between Syria's government and the moderate rebels, Islamic State can be defeated within a couple of weeks, as long as Assad steps down after that. Well, of course, they can defeat the Islamic State in a couple of weeks because they'll just withdraw the proxy army and say, we're done here. Now, they're getting desperate right now because they're looking at a peaceful situation because they're losing the battle. They're losing the proxy army, the moderate rebels. They don't even really exist because they're part of Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and other terrorist groups. So what really John Kerry is saying right now is the same message. Have Assad step down. Transition to a new government. But of course, they're never going to let the elections go through because that would mean it's left up to the people, and they can't control that. And right now, they're saying this because they're building up for a major, major attack in Assad's area. And they're bringing in the ground troops. They're bombing the entire area. Now remember, they're not bombing the Islamic State. They're still bombing the infrastructure in that area. They're bringing in the troops to surround their proxy army so Russia cannot bomb them. They're bringing in the ground troops to secure a safe zone between Turkey because they still need to fund the fighters. They still need the oil profits. This is all leading up to World War III. And we are so close to this. We're one incident away from the Big Bang. This is what's happening right now because the economy is almost near collapse. Now, yesterday we talked about the San Bernardino shooting, and we're starting to see a lot of the information coming out doesn't make sense. But I want to bring us back in time a little bit to talk about what happened. And this is actually odd on how this occurred. Now, we're supposed to believe that there was an argument at a holiday party which led to some type of workplace violence. This is what they were trying to push off. And basically, this person who was having this argument stormed off and returned with his wife after leaving this event with tactical gear, rifles, pistols, rolling bags, extra ammo, and pipe bombs. So you're trying to tell me they had an argument and he just had, and she had all of these things ready to go and they brought them all with them in tactical gear to go into this area where there's disabled people. Does that really make sense to anyone? And then we have the ATF and FBI. They arrived in a split second. Now, the FBI really has no jurisdiction here because at the point it was just a shooting incident. No one crossed state lines and nothing really happened. So why were they there so quickly? But we always see this happen where they arrive and they're always on the scene very, very quickly. And there was so much information coming out during this where they said there were 3 shooters at large wearing masks, of course. They're wearing body armor because you never can see their faces. And they, of course, had the assault rifles. I mean, that's how it always starts. And then they had to have the big production of the high-speed chase so they can televise this all across the corporate media. So everyone goes, ooh, ah, look, they're chasing the suspects. And then they had basically the shootout. And they killed the husband and the wife. Now, the third person they took into custody. I wonder who the third person actually is. Was that the handler? Where they're just going to let that person go and we'll never hear from that person saying he's not part of this? Because that's what normally happens. It may be that he just got caught up in this and there was no way out. So the police confirm they had explosive devices found inside the building where the shooting took place, and they were planning this. So was it a work dispute? Because this seems like it was a little bit more of a work dispute. So it seems like the narrative, the story, and the agendas are getting a little confused at this point. And this makes no sense because the person, Farouk, lived home with his wife and his children in Corona, California. He worked as some type of tax assessor on the California tax representative for the California State Board of Equalization. He graduated from La Sierra High School and studied finance at California State University at Fullerton until 2013. He was a U.S. citizen. At first they said he wasn't a citizen. And this whole thing does not fit whatsoever. Because why in the world would he do something like this, both him and his wife? What's the motive? Because he had a work dispute? That doesn't even make sense. They're trying to push that he was Muslim, that it was a terrorist act. Does that make sense? Not at this point. The motive is not really clear, and a lot of times the motive is never clear in these things. So of course, we have all of this going on right now. Everyone is trying to push their own agenda. We have the gun control group pushing their agenda. We have the ISIS terrorist group pushing their agenda. And basically, they're crossing each other. They're not making sense. So this person went in with a Smith & Wesson MMP 15, along with 2 handguns, 2 223s. I mean, think about this for a second. Now, of course, what always happens is the person who is actually doing the false flag, and these people could be along with them. Maybe they were telling that this was another drill, and we'll get to that in a minute. Maybe they didn't think this was real, that they were hired on, a little bit extra money. We can play the bad guy, no big deal, because they've probably seen many of these before, because we know they've been having them almost monthly at this point. And maybe they thought, okay, this would be fun, and, we'll dress up and we'll do this thing. And we can see right now that a lot of things don't make sense. But of course, Obama is out there saying that we have a pattern of the mass shootings in this country that has no parallel anywhere else in the world. And there's steps that we could take to kind of help this out, help the situation by, getting rid of the weapons. Stronger background checks. All his executive orders. All the bills that are pending in Congress, like the UN Arms Treaty, the Dianne Feinstein bill. We should just pass all that and violate the Second Amendment. The governor of California. Now, you think you'd be sticking around because of this horrific event, but he's going and flying off to the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris. So we had this horrific shooting in California, and the governor is leaving. Does that make any sense at this point? No, it does not. By the way, this whole shooting took place in a gun-free zone. Now, what was going on during this time? Well, most likely, and I'm leaning to, yes, this was a false flag, because when we look back in time, we see many different drills occurring at the same time or the day before the actual event. Now let's go back in time a little bit. November 13th, 2015, Paris attack. Well, one such exercise was held on Friday morning, the day of the latest terrorist attack. And in a twist of fate, the simulated emergency was a mass shooting. And lo and behold, guess what? We had a real shooting. Charleston, South Carolina, the church shooting, June 17th, 2015. We had an actor-shooter threat instructor program from June 15th to June 19th, which overlapped the church shooting. Okay, we have 2 things here where we had drills occurring at the same exact time. The Boston Marathon attack, April 15th, 2013. In this case, the training exercise was called off because the real thing happened. And they were doing the DHS-funded drill known as Operation Urban Shield. Sandy Hook, the shooting there, December 14th, 2012. By coincidence, there was a drill going on at the Putnam County Emergency Response Team, just happened to be there and assembled for training at the same time because they were doing a mock scenario of an active shooter in a school. July 20th, 2012, Aurora, Colorado. Batman shooting. Rocky Vista University College is in the middle of holding a specialized classes in disaster life support for 152nd year medical students. For 152nd year medical students, I should say, along with response to natural disasters like a shooter firing at people in a movie theater. The Oslo bombing shooting attack, July 22nd, 2011. Only hours before Anders Behring Breivik began shooting children, the police emergency squad concluded an exercise where they practiced the same exact thing. The 7/7 2005 bombing in the London Underground. A fictional scenario of multiple bomb attacks on London Underground took place exactly the same time the bomb occurred. 9/11, 2001. FEMA was on the ground for training. 22 drills took place on that day, among which was National Reconnaissance Office exercise in Virginia, involving simulated plane crashing into a tall building. We are seeing the same thing. Now, when the people in San Bernardino were interviewed, we hear that a woman said she thought it was another drill. Because starting last year, there's been a drill almost every month where they were practicing active shooter drills in the San Bernardino County area. We also had a drill going on the same day at Rancho Cucamonga Fire Department, was one of the agencies participating in the event, and that was about 22 miles or so away from all of this. And this is why they were able to get the SWAT team over there very, very quickly. So the San Bernardino shooting has all the signs of a staged government operation. Now the question is, which agenda are they going to use for this? Because we know that they were having all these things at the same time. Now, when this first occurred, and the story was just breaking, police warned people not to talk to the media. And at one point during the KTLA live stream, the reporters attempted to interview a witness, and multiple officers rushed up and pushed the reporters and witnesses apart so they could not talk. So, the San Bernardino Police Department Lieutenant Richard Lawhead said that their SWAT team happened to be conducting training nearby. So, all of this fits into every single false flag that we've seen. They're following the script. Now, what is the script? Well, there's different scripts for different situations. We have one for terror, we have one for mass shooting. This, if we combine them, we see that, yes, this entire event follows the script. Media covers the event, blows it out of proportion, continually stays on it. No survivors. The shooters are dead. We had family appear on the TV within 24 hours. They're blaming guns. Obama came right out and said guns are the problem. The shooters, either they commit suicide or they're killed. Well, this time they were killed. Except for that one person, which we're not getting very much information from who this is. And most likely that one person will just disappear. Remember the Sandy Hook, when you had the people running in the woods? Those people just disappeared because they were part of the PSYOP. We're just waiting for this manifesto. That should be coming very soon, of why he wanted to do all of this. And she wanted to do all of this. The patsies. But what's very interesting about this whole thing is that San Bernardino was the site of intense debates. And what were they debating? Well, about the Muslim immigration to this area. So this area, the U.S. State Department chose as the proposed site of Syrian refugees. That's very interesting in itself. Now, the president came out and said Well, this maybe looks like a terrorist act, and we have the gun control group pushing gun control, and then we have the terrorist group pushing terrorism. The problem with this is the narrative of these stories, they cross, because the gun control is saying, listen, we need to take guns away from the people, because guns in the people's hands, this is what happens. They go around and they kill people. On the other hand, if they're using the terrorism narrative, we have the Islamic State, this radicalized people running around with weapons, and the story of taking away weapons doesn't make sense, because wouldn't you want the people to have weapons to protect themselves against terrorism? So they can't even get their story straight at this point. And this is how you know this whole thing was concocted. And it might have been concocted by one group, and the other group's trying to take advantage of it. So Obama is calling for legislation to limit gun access right now. And he's saying it could be terrorism. Very confusing messages. But what's very interesting about all of this, and we know their whole mission is to take weapons away from the people. Their mission is to convince us that the Islamic State is a threat. But if we just look at the gun control portion of it, and we go back in time, we see during Ronald Reagan's time in office, there were only 11 mass shootings. George H.W. Bush, there was 12. Bill Clinton, 23. George W. Bush, 20. And we know, because Obama told us, the push to get the weapons away from the people is his main goal. 162 mass murders in his presidency from 2009 to 2015. What does that tell you? I mean, you're trying to tell me that all of a sudden it just skyrocketed. And all of this is happening in his 7th year. Most of it, the majority of it. Does that make any sense? Does that show that there's some type of an agenda here? Absolutely. No question about it. And we can see from all the indicators and from all the information, this was a planned false flag event once again. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.